I received an interesting mail after my discussion with Steve Falconer, who believes in evolutionary theory. This idea of creation versus evolution constantly comes up. I don't know if you guys have noticed. It's a fascinating conversation.
What fascinates me is that this has become another sort of inflection point, another area of division, and that, you know, it's almost as if you can't have evolution and creation as being features of the same mechanism. I think that the idea that Darwinism is somehow the full picture of evolution is somehow, I mean, that's a separate thing again, in my opinion, because Darwin and Darwinism and survival of the fittest is, of course, connected very strongly with the eugenics movement, and rightly so. But again, it doesn't preclude the possibility that that's the only evolutionary mechanism that exists. So, you know, I struggle with the idea that these should be mutually exclusive ideas: creation and evolution.
Yeah, I think that's a good start point. I mean, I would say, going back to it being a point of inflection, as with this and many other of the "I wasn't there, so I don't know" topics, I'm perfectly happy not knowing. To which people will be leaping off the sofa saying, "But we've been lied to," or "Have we been lied to?" or a variant on that theme. And yes, there is that possibility. But if you make an issue of it and you make it matter, then it will become a problem. And if you don't make an issue of it and you don't make it matter, then it doesn't become a problem. So ultimately, it is up to you to define exactly what it is you believe. I think the area specifically is totally fascinating. And I think even there are, I mean, you get into problematic areas in terms of taxonomy and whatnot, but it's quite easy to observe that people within our lifetimes have changed in varying degrees. You can see the effects of what I think what are a poorer diet or things being introduced into water supplies, or this, that, and the other, as to just basic features like the shape of somebody's face, for example, with regard to whether or not they breathe through their nose or their mouth, and what it is that might have led to that in the first place. Things like the amount of hair that people have on their heads or on their bodies, those sorts of things definitely do change. So whether one counts that as evolution, I'm not certain. I suppose that's up to the individual debater. But the point is that things definitely do change, and you see it. I mean, I see it a lot with livestock. You absolutely get different generations of livestock that exhibit slightly different, they're actually both things, either behavioural tendencies or body shape or characteristics, physical characteristics. So stuff does change. I don't think one can really deny that. I think the perennial question of, well, if something came from something else and the something else still exists in the form that it was originally in, why did some change and some didn't? I think that's the big one. But then again, why should we? It's funny, really, because we're told trust the science, and we all go ha ha ha. Why would we do that? Because scientists are all corrupt. And at the same time, we want to cling to a certain extent to that very same science. I mean, do we need to do that? Or do we just need to be happier in our own minds that we believe one thing rather than the other? Going back to the beginning, as I say, when it concerns an issue that you cannot possibly yourself resolve, you might easily be able to find credible evidence of something that points to something else, and indeed vice versa. But you can never know, and we're not going to be around long enough to see any of this play out, presumably.
And aside from anything else, this topic bears no relationship to the issues of the day, in the sense that, whether we were created or we evolved is irrelevant to whether somebody's going to drop a nuclear bomb on our heads in the next 2 years. So, we shouldn't really be fighting about this.
No, indeed. But I think that's what I mean about all the other things, all the other talking points that get dragged into it, but mostly Christianity. And, well, if you're going to start talking about evolution, then you're dismissing what the Bible sets out at a stroke. And then that means that's opening the floodgates for Christians to be wiped off the face of the earth and all of that sort of thing. So I see exactly why people do choose it as a point. I'm just not sure there's much to be gained from doing so.
No, but it is part of the market of ideas. And I see these in the comments, like so Tim Noakes might say on my show, yeah, well, humans have evolved to eat meat, right? And then someone will go, lol, he said evolved. Can't take him seriously.
Like I say, you choose whether or not it matters to you. I mean, I agree to a point. It matters. I agree that we should talk about all these things. Nothing should be off limits completely. But the thing is, if you're going to question everything, I think you'll only drive yourself mad if you're not prepared to accept that sometimes you're not going to get to the answer. So, yeah, I mean, I would absolutely question everything. And I think, and actually going on Tim Noakes, about evolving to eat meat, are you sure that's what he said? I would have thought it was the other way around, that we were designed to eat meat and some people have evolved, or their guts have changed in order to tolerate certain things.
I don't remember specifically, but I mean, you get what I'm saying, the point.
I do, yes, I do. But I think it's a really interesting one, actually, because it does provide an insight, and largely it's not discussed. I mean, I've not heard Tim talk about it, but this pertains to blood type and diet, and the inextricable link between that and geography and what available food sources were. But ultimately, I'm straying well into territory that I can't possibly substantiate because I wasn't there. So yeah, I mean, it's totally fascinating. But the what is it that people want to do? Ultimately, they want to take it all the way back to creation and how is it that we're here at all? And I find it, I don't mean this at all scornfully, but I do find it rather laughable that people will come down so definitively one side or the other, because how on earth can they possibly know? Because there's always the question, it doesn't matter which way you go, yeah, but what happened before that? And what happened before that? So yeah, fascinating to talk about, but how on earth does one ever know?
And I think the real danger here, Jerm, is that, and we see this so much. And maybe Mike Eden's expressing this a little bit, and I think it's dangerous. This idea that everything is a lie, and therefore anything that we're told is untrue. And therefore, the earth is flat. Whatever your particular thing is, that becomes an ideology at that point. That becomes something which is not based on a genuine search for the truth. That's a conclusion is reached, and it's immovable. It's an immovable object at that point. And in fact, it becomes the height of hypocrisy, because many people will say that, well, science is scientism, that it's become something which is no longer an investigation of the life around us, that it's reached conclusions which are driving policy. And to some degree, I'm not denying that. But the point is that as soon as you say, therefore, everything's a lie and therefore the earth is flat, then you're falling into exactly the trap that you're accusing the opposition of doing, your opposition of doing. And that is dangerous. In my opinion, we've got to be absolutely challenging our own viewpoints first before we start throwing the allegations at anybody else.
Yes, I mean, that is sort of an undercurrent. The idea that anything that is an established view should be questioned. I mean, as Nick Hudson says, any big event that requires a big solution is almost always a lie.
But equally, that same rigor, there's that same determination that we challenge climate change and we challenge everything that the scientific community says. We've got to apply that same rigor to every position that we take, and that's where perhaps we don't, we don't fulfill that obligation as well as we might.
But then who do you trust? I think that was kind of what Mike was asking also.
I don't think it's a question. It's not a question of trust, and this is actually fundamental to the whole discussion because this idea of who do you trust is something which is being heavily promoted by governments everywhere. Because and my view very strongly is that as soon as you put your trust in someone, you're switching your brain off. So you put your trust in the BBC, you don't need to question anything anymore because the BBC said so. You don't have to think. And I'm sorry, you're going to have to edit this out, but I need to cough. I do apologize. But so we absolutely, as far with respect to sort of public people that are speaking publicly or any kind of institution that's speaking publicly or the scientific community or the media, whatever it happens to be, we should not be trusting any of those people as a sort of blanket reaction. And we should be absolutely asking questions, whether those questions are about creation or evolution or whatever it happens to be, that we start asking questions, and ourselves should be the target of that as well, as I say.
Yeah, there is a very big problem of people in the alternative space of falling into the identical trap where they create yet again a 1 and 0 scenario. Well, if it's allowed on YouTube, therefore it can't be true or trusted. And that in itself is, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, and the mainstream media, people will say, well, it was in the mainstream media, so it can't be true. Well, that's not true. It can be true. And of course, that is our challenge, is working out what's the truth and what's the propaganda. And it is a challenge. I don't want to underestimate that. And again, we should not trust blindly what anybody says, whether that be the BBC or the UK column or whomever. But we should not, in my opinion, be going around just immediately assuming that everything that's seen from a certain source is a pile of nonsense, because it's not always the case.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the who to trust is very problematic. I mean, look at how that was manipulated with the COVID jabs. I like David Beckham, so I'll go and get a jab because he said so, for example, ad infinitum. So I think it should always be the information rather than the person that presented it, which is, we get into the Hitler like dogs thing. I can't remember quite how that goes, but I think you know what I'm talking about. So yes, the ultimately you trust yourself. And actually, it's rather more than that. I think you're in real trouble if you can't trust yourself in all respects, and that is a really, really important point, because it really does dictate the way you are able to lead your life, and it doesn't just concern sort of information, but it's an ability to live and thrive outside of all the sorts of things that we do talk about, because otherwise you get bogged down by them, and ultimately that displays a lack of trust in yourself. So yes, you might have been lied to about this, that, and the other. However, you need to convert that knowledge into a positive, or at least I would say that's what I try to do to it, or with it. You use that with which to arm yourself, rather than continually considering that having been lied to is something you should consider as a battering, because frankly, it isn't.
I don't know any person who believes, so I know some people who believe that Earth is flat. Not one of them got the jab, right? But I know people who believe in NASA's narrative and got the jab, if that makes sense. So in other words, I see a degree, just in my immediate circles, I see a degree of critical thinking, which I think is a good thing, even if their views are possibly preposterous.
I'm going to say I don't agree with that, and because I know people that believe in NASA and also didn't get the jab. So the thing about if you look at the thing about Richard Dawkins and people like Richard Dawkins is that they are totally ideologically based. And I would say that there are people that are rabid creationists that are also absolutely ideologically based. And the problem is that I think that if you're suggesting that people who were falling on the creationist camp didn't take the jab through some kind of form of critical thinking, I would say that that's not the case. That in fact they didn't take the jab because somebody that was an influencer in the creationist space on YouTube said that they shouldn't, and there was no critical thinking in it at all. It was just some influencer said that you shouldn't do this. I think that what we're looking at there are pretty core extremes, and I think that there are people on both sides of that argument that are occupying the influencer space that are actually probably agents of the state. I think Dawkins is one. I think that there are some people on the flat Earth community that appear to be as well. So I think if you're going to be a critical thinker, you've got to be a critical thinker, and that means not falling into the trap of ideology. And many people blindly do that, unfortunately.
Yes, I have seen that, and I can confirm I do know people who believe NASA's narratives and didn't get the jab, because I don't think really that people who are caught up in everything that's mainstream are more critically minded than I think people who are skeptical. I think being skeptical is a good thing.
Yeah, skeptical is a good thing. Absolutely, it is a good thing. No question about that. But not to the degree of absolutism. I'm an absolute skeptic, and therefore everything is false. That actually can land us in very dangerous territory.
Isn't absolutism sometimes a good thing?
Can you give an example?
Well, I think that a rape is always a bad thing. I'm pretty absolute in that rationale. I can't find a positive reason for rape.
Well, you're in tricky territory there, really, when you look at the law. I mean, I don't know what it is in South Africa, but here, you come up against all sorts of technicalities with regard to age and the inability to give consent. And, I'm not obviously not advocating for rape, but I mean, there is nuance there.
No, but rape is effectively, it's a violation of a woman's, generally a woman's body.
But is it if the very next day it wasn't rape because she was a year older?
Well, then she wasn't raped, sure.
No, but she was. I mean, this is the point I'm making. According to law, she was raped because she's a minor because of her age. So, you mean
like if she was 15 and then she turned 16?
Exactly.
Yeah, for example, the young guy that ended up in prison in Saudi Arabia for a guts of a year because he had a sexual relationship on holiday with, I think he was 18 and she was 17, and the age of consent was 18. So he was, that was statutory rape, and therefore he spent time in prison and got released early because of I can't remember which. There was a festival that traditionally people are released from prison at just recently. So there is nuance there. I mean, I think if what you're saying is that under a very relatively narrow definition of what that is, that somebody carries out that act with someone who was absolutely not agreeing or consenting to that, then that is absolutely wrong under all circumstances if consent wasn't there. But I think you'd be struggling to find any thing which could be absolutely considered in absolute terms to be one way or the other. There's always nuance.
My comment was about a moral judgment, not about what the law states, because the law is fickle, it changes over time. But the idea that somebody's bodily autonomy has been violated against their will is always a bad thing. How can it be a good thing? How can it ever be a good thing?
No, I would probably agree with that. If it's against someone's will, if anything happens against someone's will.
But you see, this is problematic because I would agree with you in terms of rape. But then if you're suggesting that there's an absolute where bodily autonomy is concerned, then I think that's again problematic, because there are situations in which you might see that somebody is about to harm themselves in some way, for example, present themselves for a COVID jab, and you might seek to interpose yourself or take them away from that situation or destroy whatever it is, you are interfering with their bodily autonomy.
No, but that's not rape, obviously.
No. I know it's not. But I mean, the issue was one of bodily autonomy, wasn't it?
Yes, but in the sense, but in the case of rape, it's obviously a bit more than bodily autonomy. It's like it's without getting into the graphics.
Well, no, but I mean but one has to get into the graphics. I mean, this is part of the issue with it, because certainly again in this country, okay, all right, well, maybe we are getting into it, but a rape can only be committed by a man because it involves the use of a penis. And
well, obviously that's not true. I mean, what I mean is, obviously a man can be raped. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, a man can be raped, but it has to be by another man. So anyway, that is a bit of a legal rabbit hole. But still, the point is again, it is very difficult, I think, to be absolute about things, about anything. Yes, I agree with you, specifically with rape, specifically with bodily autonomy. And the obviously fundamental issue of consent, yes, absolutely. But the problem is you're making that case on the basis of the bodily autonomy thing, and then you move to a different situation, like I just suggest, and then in actual fact, bodily autonomy becomes something where there is a bit of wiggle room.
So, do you think that being principled is not equivalent to absolutism?
That is a good question. I
think that being principled is not equivalent to absolutism because I think that having principles doesn't rule out the nuance that we're talking about here. I would struggle to find an example of someone having principles that were absolutely absolutist.
Well, let's just say you believe that cheating on your wife is a terrible idea.
Well,
hang on a minute. But that's not a principle. That's a specific action. I mean, the principle is one of trust or betrayal, isn't it? So in principle, you would never betray somebody's trust, or specifically your wife's trust.
I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's not a principle. Maybe it's a value. I don't know. I guess it comes down to how we define these terms. What do you think, Mike?
No, but that's what I mean. But let's say the principle is the betrayal, or specifically the betrayal of trust. You might well have that as a principle. I mean, that I would say is a good principle with which to sort of conduct yourself. But you may find situations in which that you feel that actually you would need to override that principle for I hate to use the word, but for a greater good or to meet another end. So the principles can, of course, in effect, come into conflict with one another. If you're particularly, we talked a lot about sort of family context, but you might consider that shielding somebody from a certain piece of information because you thought it would be better for them not to know it or not to see it, particularly if it's going to be traumatic, that could constitute a betrayal of trust. So you've sort of got two principles in conflict with one another. So it is very difficult to be absolutist about any of these things.
All right, another example is taking the life of an innocent person, murder, right? I mean, I don't think that's a good idea under any circumstance. Is that absolutist?
Well, hold on. Define innocent person. Is there any such thing? So, see, this conversation, a lot of this conversation is about definitions and so on. But the bottom line here is, what is an innocent person? And if you're taking that innocent person's life, that might be perceived as murder. But if you're doing it in order to prevent a more significant wrong, then is it wrong? I'm just not certain that life is black and white in these terms, that it's possible to be absolutist ever. I think there's always nuance. And actually, jury trials, for example, has been the topic of conversation recently. I can't remember whether we were talking about it at some point, but there is this effort to remove juries from the judicial system in the United Kingdom. But part of the reason is because juries still have the power in the UK to look at a law, look at an ethical situation, a legal situation, and decide that under this particular set of circumstances, that law does not apply, that law is bad law under these circumstances. It's called annulment by jury. And this is a fundamental part of the way that the judicial system is supposed to work in the UK. So my point is that power is there because there's a recognition in the judicial system, in the law, in the legal system that there are no absolutes. And this is one of the dangers of AI, in my opinion, because you're bringing absolutes into the picture. And you're saying computer is never wrong. The computer knows absolutely what the truth is, and there's no wiggle room, therefore, at all. That's where the danger lies. I think the idea that there are absolutes in life is just wrong.
Okay, so the argument you're making is that there are no absolutes in life, and if somebody attempts to have an absolute or an absolutist view, it's potentially dangerous.
Yeah, I think it is. Yes, I think it is. I don't know what else to say about that. I think it is dangerous because not only does it drive us into corners individually and say getting to the point where we are getting to that point, and many people are getting to the point of saying, nothing that I'm saying in the world is true. They are lying to me constantly, and therefore, and that can lead to making some pretty dangerous decisions for ourselves. So I think it is absolutely a dangerous thing to
absolutely.
Absolutely.
But to feed into what you're saying, to add to what you're saying, Elon Musk refers to himself as a free speech absolutist. Now, this is demonstrably false.
Well, this is absolutely right, and you're right to call him out. But I would consider myself, if I'm going to come even close to being absolutist on anything, it's on that. Because my view is that you allow the other person to say what they've got to say, and you can make a decision about what they say, and you can argue against what they say. And I fundamentally disagree with. Perhaps I even absolutely disagree with the idea that somebody saying something that I disagree with is somehow dangerous and has to be shut down. what that means is that I don't have, if somebody says something that I disagree with and I feel that that is dangerous and they have to be stopped from saying it, what I'm saying is I don't have an argument against that person's position. And if I genuinely don't have an argument about that person's position, then I need to be thinking about that. I need to be thinking about what my argument is. Why do I find that person's position so dangerous? Why do I want him to stop saying that? And why do I not have something in rebuttal? Because that's my failure, not theirs.
Yeah, in South Africa, you have the third largest political party filling up stadiums, 100,000 people, singing "Kill the Farmer, Kill the White Man," right? 100,000 people. That's not one person who you are disagreeing with. It's 100,000 people jumping up and down, singing songs together in unison about killing white farmers or killing white people, and the politician on stage is shooting a machine gun in the air. That's not a very good idea to be singing songs with masses and masses and masses of people about killing a certain group of people, because that can lead to killing a certain group of people.
I couldn't agree
more. How do you counter that?
That is a very good question. I'm not sure that I have an answer. That's why I'm not an absolutist. I would come as close to being an absolutist as it is possible to be on this issue. But you're absolutely right. The only way to counter that would be to fill another stadium with people providing a different argument. But what we're I think looking at there is something which goes beyond speech, because what you're looking at there
ideology.
But it's more than that, isn't it? Because what you're looking at there is the sort of Hitlerist Nuremberg sort of event where you're actually bringing people together and carrying out a certain set of actions which are going to cause a psychological effect on those people. And so again, because it's impossible to have absolutes here, where does the idea of speech end and the idea of a psychological operation begin? Because what you're describing is something that goes beyond freedom of speech, in my opinion. That's not freedom of speech. That is, something which is designed to have a psychological effect on the people that are in the room or in the stadium, which is beyond just making an argument about something. You're bringing the idea of singing together into this picture, and singing together is something that helps build, ideologies. Let's put it that way. It can be used in that sense anyway.
Boris Johnson has killed far more people than Julius Malema by saying whatever he said in 2020. Stay at home, protect the NHS, and whatever the third thing is that I can't remember what it was. But there's no doubt in my mind that him saying that and having the mainstream media rebroadcast it meant that tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people died during the spring of 2020 because all their care and lifelines, particularly the elderly, were removed. But no one would have suggested at the time, oh, he can't say that. That would never have been perceived to be a free speech issue. Whereas, Malema jumping up and down on stage singing "Kill the Boer," obviously it is difficult to listen to. But actually, how many people have gone out there, if we're to consider incitement, how many people have gone with that in mind to go and do that? I mean, I'm not saying none at all. I'm just, it's a question.
But
so,
difficult. Sorry for interrupting, but I'm going to agree with Mike in the sense that it does cross over into the realm of psychological operations. COVID was another good example, as you just pointed out. You have somebody like Fauci coming onto TV with tens of millions, maybe more people listening to his every word, saying, put on a mask, put on 2 masks, put on 3 masks. It's gonna protect you.
Absolutely. So I think we return to this issue of trust and trusting yourself. And if you're at a, can't remember what's his party called, Malema's party,
the EFF.
Okay, so if you're at one of his rallies, it's up to you. It's to your discernment. Are you seriously there thinking that what he's singing and what everybody is singing is to be interpreted literally, putting to one side the fact that it is a deliberate psychological operation? But it is up to you as to whether you do that, in the same way that it was up to us as to whether you did stay at home, protect the NHS, and do the other thing that I probably will never remember, hopefully will never remember, or go and get the jab, or any of the other things that people of a certain mind, and probably people who are listening to this, consider to be utterly abhorrent to listen to. It is still up to you to trust yourself in terms of your reaction to it. How do you deal with that piece of information?
We can't be absolutist about
Sure.
this, and one of the things that the British government has said is that everybody, as the censorship regime rolls out, everybody will have the right to say what they want, but they won't have the right to be heard. So you'll be allowed to post whatever you like, but of course then you'll be shadow banned and all the other mechanisms that we already know that social media platforms use. And of course that is effectively a shutdown on freedom of speech by shadow banning people and so on. But also equally, the shutdown on freedom of speech on the BBC, for example, which is supposed to be a public service broadcaster, when they decided that they were going to abandon their claim of impartiality and objectivity on the climate change policy area. And they said, well, we're not going to give equal time to people that argue against climate change, for example. So they have taken an absolute position on that. And that absolutism is absolutely detrimental to the entire discussion, because there's no discussion possible. It's only ideology at that point. And so, I tend towards the view that attempting to censor people, no matter what they say, is a bad thing. But or at least it ends up being a bad thing. But I absolutely equally take your point that there are certain circumstances where it may be really regrettable that things have been said in a particular way. I still don't think I would shut it down.
Well, I mean, in that particular example, it's also a symptom of something else. Catherine Austin Fitz makes, I think, a fairly good point when she says, look, you have to go and change the minds of people, but unfortunately you can only do it one person at a time.
When I was in the police and I was out and about, I would deliberately engage people in conversation about mask wearing and tell them that they had absolutely no need to wear one and that no one could challenge them on it, which they always found a slightly problematic thing to hear from somebody who's in the police at the time. And I can remember saying it to a woman I saw in a shop. I was investigating something totally absurd, like it usually was. But there was a young lady in there with a baby in a pram, and the mother was wearing a mask, and it was an awful sight, as it was across the board. But to see that this little baby was not able to see her mother's face, and I was just killing time waiting for somebody to reappear. So I went to her and said, look, because I was in plain clothes, but identified myself and said, look, I just want to make you aware that you don't have to wear a face covering. It's entirely up to you if you perceive there to be any harm or risk of harm. And your baby not being able to see you would certainly qualify as that. And further, there's no need for you to display a sign or anything. And indeed, if anybody challenges you, you don't need to explain yourself. And she listened to me sort of politely enough and didn't remove her mask. Not that I was expecting, it wasn't a sort of, right, go on then, take your mask off. But the point is, it was just presenting her with the information. And I don't know, maybe she could, but I could not myself understand how a mother could possibly want to put that sort of a barrier between her and her child, which sounds like I'm having an individual go at this woman. I'm not, because I understand exactly the psychological warfare she'd been subjected to in order to do that in the first place. But it was very interesting to just be able to have this conversation, admittedly slightly one-sided conversation with her. And what I would say that it suggests is that she did not trust herself. Because if she had, why on earth would she ever have done that in the first place? I mean, there's no way, had she not been told to, that she would have suddenly thought one day, gosh, I tell you what, this baby I don't think needs to see my face anymore. I mean, it's just, wouldn't happen. So the psychological side of all this is so significant.
Would it be a fair assessment to think of an absolutist view as an unwavering stance on something, regardless of context, regardless of anything? It's just a completely radicalized position, while being principled might be about holding a set of values or ethical beliefs and being able to adapt it based on context or situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good stab. I think you're exactly right that absolutism, in the way that we're talking about it, gives you no room for maneuver. There's no nuance. I think the way we've talked about it prevents you, ironically, it prevents you from achieving perhaps the best result. And in actual fact, you might find that you're even thwarting your own ideals by being absolutist. Obviously, it's absurdly hypothetical. But yes, I mean, although I think, to go back to what Mike had said, which in fact was exactly what I was about to bring into the conversation, all of this pertains so much to AI and the whole computer says no thing. You're asking a non-sentient tool to make a decision based on an absolute, which is utterly ridiculous in every regard, not just those that concern life and death, and that is something we should absolutely be very, very aware of. But of course,
absolutely,
it's crept in a lot, hasn't it? But that should be one of the things that undoes people's willingness to jump into bed with this sort of technology. Why would you do that? It cannot possibly understand the sorts of things we're talking about.
And it does actually horseshoe all the way back to the beginning, because I mentioned the dichotomy of creation versus evolution, and both of those, as you have pointed out, Mike, are absolutist views.
I don't think they in and of themselves are necessarily absolutist. I think that the way that some vested interests express them.
Sorry, but
yeah,
sorry,
absolutely,
Dawkins does seem to be, yeah.
Yes, that's what I'm getting to. Certain vested interests present them as absolutist. I think that there is much more nuance in the if the debate is a serious debate. I think there's much more nuance in that. And at the end of the day, no matter what Dawkins or anybody else says, the question of where life came from in the first place has not been answered. The question of, and as Charles has said, even those who believe in the Big Bang, the next question is, well, where did the Big Bang come from? What was before that? And so on. And so these questions are unanswerable, and it seems like a really ridiculous place to start in taking an absolute position on them. We start by asking the questions, and Dawkins is a campaigner. He has a fundamental absolute non-belief in a creator, and he is a campaigner on that basis, and should be recognized as such. And so when we're making a decision on who to trust, we need to absolutely make that decision recognizing that fact. And the same goes for people that are coming from the creationist side as well. They're often, if not always, campaigners in their own way, because they have a fundamental faith. And that's not a criticism of faith, but when we're making our decisions about what is what we should believe and who to trust, that we've got to take these things into account.
Oh, I think we already have. Go on.
Yes. No, I was going to say Peter Boghossian, who was on my show a few weeks ago. He in his book he says you can simply just ask the question, well, how do you know? Yeah. Which is exactly what you're saying, Mike. And what that does is that it potentially dismantles an absolutist position. So, in other words, vaccines work. Well, how do you know? We all come from the Big Bang. How do you know? Well, God created us. How do you know? Etc.
Exactly, and that goes back to the point that Mike, I think, was making. But where we got into the if the Earth's flat, then there's no way I'll take a jab. And I think on whichever side of the wherever on the spectrum you find yourself in terms of society and what people believe, for the vast majority of people, it's a bingo card. So you've either got, I've got an electric vehicle, therefore I believe that a man can be a woman, and I believe that the climate is being changed by a man, and this. I mean, it's okay, parody, but I mean, and it's the same on the other side. It is the sort of right. Well, I've got no jabs. I've got the government's lying to us. I've got. The Big Bang is a hoax. I've got flat Earth, all the rest of it. And I think there is a great deal on, as I say, across the spectrum of people just falling in with the supposed beliefs of the people that they think that they are part of a group with. But I don't think that's quite how things really are, or indeed how they should be. If you're not making each of those judgments for yourself, then I think you are in trouble. And I think you're also further in trouble if you do believe that the people that are holding similar views do actually regard you as being part of their group, and that group means something and is going to do something, because I think ultimately it's probably not.
But you just mentioned transgenderism. If somebody asks me, can a man become a woman? And my answer is no. Is that an absolutist position?
Depends on your definition of man and woman. If you have taken it to the extreme and you've decided that you're a woman and you've had bits cut off and your body reformed in particular ways, what does that make you? I mean, I would just, for the avoidance of doubt, I would suggest that it doesn't make you a woman, but it depends on what your definition of a woman is.
What is a woman?
Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I thought for a second your question might have been about evolution again.
No. I was just.
No, I know. I'm joking. But no. Well, this is it. So it is very much to do with sort of defining terms. But it's completely ridiculous, isn't it? The idea that that anyone can be anything else or anyone else. I mean,
I was going to say, I don't think it's absolutism. I think that there is just science.
Yeah, but you say that, but you speak to someone who is a pro-trans campaigner, and they'll say that that's not true. So where is the truth in it? I mean, I personally may agree with you over the position of the other person, but where is the truth? Is it possible to find? Is it possible to identify an absolute truth?
Well, chromosomes in that instance.
Well, only if the other person agrees that that's what defines being a woman. So the problem is just choosing the ground and then finding that the other person wants to meet you on it, which by and large they don't. Which is how we get in all these pickles in the first place. Well,
exactly. This is the problem. Yeah.
An absolute mess, one might say.
But it does then keep forcing one to ask questions, to hold up a mirror and to analyze what one thinks.
Well, I mean, this brings us right back to the very beginning of this conversation, because this, I have to say, is the hill that I will absolutely die on, and that is that we must in my opinion, we must be challenging our own positions at every opportunity. And if somebody says something to me that I vehemently disagree with, I want to try to understand why I vehemently disagree with it, and I want to actually, because in the process of trying to understand why I vehemently disagree with it, I've got to actually challenge my own position, and that will either demolish the position that I hold or it will strengthen the position that I hold. But the danger is this whole thing of confirmation bias. We've got to be absolutely conscious of that and be aware that we could be guilty of it. I think we all are to a certain degree. And so we've got to be, we've got to be honest with ourselves. It's not just a matter of trust, because we can blindly trust ourselves just like we can blindly trust anybody else. We've got to be honest with ourselves about the positions that we hold, and whether the evidence, in inverted commas, that brought us to that position actually stands up. And if it does, then we can produce better arguments against the people that are coming at us from a different perspective. And I have to say, sorry.
No, sorry. Please go on. I thought you were done.
No, more or less I was. Yeah, I mean, more or less. So go ahead.
Now, I was going to say this has been absolutely my favorite banter session to date, and I'll tell you why. Because I have certainly begun to rethink my views on absolutism, and so I have you gentlemen to thank for that. I'm holding up a mirror.
As a result, we can all go home now.
Yeah,
Gosh,
I'm challenging
great.
my own views. So that is for me a success.
That is good. I mean, I must say, just to go back to the beginning again. I mean, in every sense, the creation evolution sort of saga is fascinating. It fascinates me in that I am amazed that people, and I don't mean this as an outright criticism, but it is amazing that people will believe that God's gift of creation, which has been mind-boggling. I mean, we don't even know the half of it. We're still unaware of who knows how many species in the air, or on land, and in the sea. But that you can believe in the wonder of that, but you can completely shut down the possibility that any of those things can change over time. I find that quite an interesting contradiction. But people are absolutely defined by contradiction. I was thinking about your chat with Derek Brose a few days ago, and he was really interesting. He was talking about his brother-in-law and his views on Donald Trump. And I thought that Donald Trump is, sorry to bring him into this, but it's such a funny one, because if you've got the, I got jabbed, but I hate Trump, Trump's bad. And you say to them, yeah, but surely you have Trump to thank for the fact that you got jabbed because of Operation Warp Speed. And they're confounded. But then you've got the, I love Trump, I didn't get jabbed. And then you have to point out the same, that, well, but Trump did Operation Warp Speed. He tried to get you jabbed. So it's a permanent, there is a permanent requirement to update your thinking and your view of a particular instance. And I think you going back to what you were talking about, Mike Yeadon's point, I think you just have to take everything on its own merits. And I think that in a way feeds back into the absolutism side of it. That this is the whole problem with absolutism, is that it doesn't give you that degree of ability to move, should you be required to do so.
That's a great ending note. Thank you, guys. This was a great session. I'll catch up with you next week.
Thanks, Jerm.